Hi, welcome to our webinar. We will be getting going in a couple of minutes, so stand by and we'll give a couple of more minutes for people to get and join. Welcome everyone. We'll be getting started in just a moment. Great, so we're 2 minutes past the hour, we'll get going. So for those of you who weren't here last time, I will give you a quick introduction to myself and Marcus. So I'm Anthony Hodson. I'm a cloud native architect at Portworx. We'll talk more about what Portworx does, but my background is as a software engineer by training and an architect and infrastructure guy by experience. I've been in the cloud space for probably about 10 years, I think. It's hard to keep track, isn't it? And I did a bit of a stint in financial software early on, and more recently DevOps software with Chef software. So I had to stand on a booth and explain what DevOps was, which was always a bit of a challenge. I'm sure it means a lot of things to a lot of people. And for the past year, I've been working at Portworx, helping people understand how to do state in Kubernetes. And I'm here also with Marcus. So Marcus, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Anthony. So Marcus Lind, one of the co-founders of Miradot. So we have been focusing on helping our customers transform and how to navigate the cloud landscape for a couple of years now. Even though I'm the CEO of Miradot currently, my passion certainly is within technology. That's where I'm from, and that is where my heart is. I focus now very much on leading our customers and making sure that our offering is aligned with what our customers are aiming for. And the company that I work for, Miradot, is focusing heavily on simplifying the interaction with IT infrastructure at heart, so to speak. That is including the domain within automation, cloud, making sure that the line of business are able to consume IT in a simple manner, even though they are in other parts of the business. We also like to focus on not only making sure that the hardware or software that we deliver are up and running, but also used in the right manner. So we usually say that our work begins where other IT consultants ends, and making sure that you're transforming the way you're working with the infrastructure and making sure that you're getting the right value out of it and your other investments. We are working currently with a bank, helping them to automate and transform into new ways of working in terms of agile development and integrations. And of course, we work very tightly with Pure, and where Portworx is certainly one of the most interesting offerings that we currently sell. Yeah, short about us and me. Back to you, Anthony.
Thank you, Marcus. And of course, any help you would want with Portworx can be had through Miradot. So please take what I say here as you know, a good start for a conversation. So last time, this is the second of 3 sessions we're planning, where we look at how we do Kubernetes with state and what that can do for your business. On our last session, we had 75 people on the call, which was wonderful. And the majority, when we asked to vote, put their first job as to reduce risk. So you can see that cost, growth, and risk. That was job number 1, was to reduce risk. And we also covered what the application benefits, which applications benefit most and least from containerization, and what the benefits of containerizing with state within containers had. So we found that based on the report on data on Kubernetes, 6 to 20% of the company's revenues for the 500 people asked said that this is the amount they thought was benefited by bringing state into Kubernetes. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about how state can be done and how we go about doing that. And before we move into the doing, we need to start with taking stock of where we are, because what we have available to us might change. So you've probably heard of the quote here from Peter Drucker: what gets measured gets managed. Now, this is a longer quote, and it's actually the opposite, really, isn't it? Even when it's pointless to measure and manage it, and even when it harms the purpose of the organization to do so. Right? So we have to be careful here, because what is measured matters. So CI/CD, if you're familiar from the software world, is built on the principle of feedback. So we want little feedback and often, which is where we would change one thing and then test it, right? And maybe we write a test for that one thing we're changing. And there's a guy who founded part of Unix, and he wrote the book on C, and he said debugging is twice as hard as writing a program in the first place. And I certainly agree with that. I'm at the top of my abilities when I'm writing something that stumped me for hours, and debugging that is very difficult. So we need to make sure that when we change bigger systems, we have a way of testing it. And because they're so complicated, we're not going to be able to do that with a small test, right? We're going to have to look for measures. But there are still ways we can test it, just because we can't test it directly. So we have to know what our northern star is in this. Hopefully that will bring up the next one. Yep, we have to know what the thing that we're looking to get to is. And those things come in 2 flavors. One is a leading indicator, something that gives you immediate feedback that we can use to orient ourselves. And the other is a lagging indicator, something that tells us after it's happened that we've done a good job. And if we can get the data with little effort now, I mean, you could make a job twice as hard by going and collecting all the information about what you've done. We don't want to do that. We want to keep it light and easy to do, but you might be able to arrange, especially today in this time of APIs and tracking and data systems, we can find out information that we can keep and take forward with us. So that's what we want to think about. And when we look at the literature, this is from the book Accelerate, which I talked about last time, which is Nicole Forsgren, Jez Humble, who wrote books on CI/CD, and Gene Kim, who wrote the Phoenix Project, all good books to read. She looked at this through a lot of research with the State of DevOps reports, and they found these key things that when measured, can causally relate to the success of the organization. So I propose that these are a good place to start, right? And they are deployment frequency, and lead time for changes, and the time it takes to restore, and the change failure rates. Those are really important, and if you can get those right, as you can see in this table, you get a better performing organization, right? That's a causal relationship. Now, in the platform team's role in operations, those software metrics, although very useful, they don't optimize for your local changes, right? What you're doing within your team. So you might need to look at some other metrics as well. One of those, if you follow the SRE principles, and there's some really good resources on that. Google have open sourced this, and you can download an ebook of papers around that, which is great. They have something called toil, and toil is work that you do that doesn't really move you forward. It just solves an immediate problem that shouldn't even be there, or that you can remove, right? Sweeping the floor is toil. I have 2 robots in my house. They do it for me, right? So I got rid of that. I can be more productive, maybe be out walking the dog, which I would enjoy far more. We also want to look at things like workload costs, because if you're trying to reduce costs to your business, tracking what those costs are and aligning with things like chargeback can help you share with those business partners in your organization how much less these things cost, right? And it also helps them optimize for that as well. So you might want to work out how much each of these workloads cost to run. And another one that apologies, misbehaving headset. Another one I see very often is the amount of time it takes to get to a data service. So your ability to go from I need a service to getting one. How can you make that shorter? Because that will aid in your velocity. And then how much happier your developers are. Now, this is a difficult one to test, but we do use things like NPS. And if those criticisms, when they answer those questions, comes up as, oh, it takes us ages to get data services or something else, then you can measure that as well. Certainly a lagging indicator, but an important one nevertheless, because people are expensive and they're hard to hire. So when we look ahead at what happens in containerization and a digital transformation journey, AWS have come up with the 7 R's, and this is a very popular model, and it allows us to think about what to do when we're looking to move your estate forward. And others have a similar model. Gartner, I think, says 6 R's, but either way, the bottom one of this is the contentious one, and it's re-architect and rewrite. And if you don't have any developers in your organization and you're looking to customize and modernize your own application, then you would need someone to do that. And I think that's why it's sometimes left out. But we've also found that the applications which are too much trouble not to do this to get transformed in this way. So if you're hitting a glass ceiling of performance or the stability is not there, then you might need to digitally transform this app as well. So Amazon's a very famous example of this. They had to break down the application. They couldn't scale to where they wanted to be. Now they were getting to market dominance, so it was a reach for something, but you could also be trying to get away from a problem that you had. And you may also want to do this if it's an app that, like Amazon, can differentiate you, right? So it's either differentiating you today because it's a terrible experience for users of the system or for operators, or you want to get further ahead and reach the front of the pack on that. So if these assets that you're making are created specific to Kubernetes, right, then the ISVs, the independent software vendors, they will create things, go directly into Kubernetes for you there, right? So these make it easier for you to run if you know Kubernetes and you're on that journey now. And it's easier for them because they have an easy way of deploying it into your clusters. So we're seeing more and more of these things come out into the bottom tier, that orange tier we've got here. And some vendors like Elasticsearch have something called an operator, and these allow you to, in a controlled way, so the software vendor decides how this works, you install it, and that manages the life cycle of that product. Now, these aren't always free. I know Elasticsearch have ones that they charge for. Our system is installed by an operator as well. So you can install these things into Kubernetes that way. They do make it easy, but each one has to be installed and looked after and managed, although they make it easier than the previous version, which were called custom resource definitions, which were a lot more complicated, but they allowed you to extend the functionality of the applications in Kubernetes. So often these systems that you install with these vendor provided products still require a data store. And the expectation might be that that data store is not within Kubernetes. So you still have that requirement to run virtual machines or physical machines and make sure that those are up and running and that they're put online for this product. And what Portworx can help with is bringing those within Kubernetes through various ways. And one of those ways is to provide that green stack there, vendor provided container SaaS. So if you can consume a service that you don't have to run, that's a great thing, right? Jeffrey Moore, Princeton professor on transformation and moving organizations forward, talks about core and context. So if it's not something that differentiates you and you can outsource it, think about doing that, because it's the things that make your company great, which make your team great, that are going to differentiate. So think about moving that context aside and letting a PaaS platform or something like that take away from your to-do list.
Anthony, can you elaborate on what the downside or challenge might be with continue to run the data storage separate from Kubernetes and run it, as you say, in a physical box or in a virtual machine?
Yes, so faulty headset, apologies. You come up against the challenges we've had in IT over the last 20 years plus years, and it's gotten better because you could do it with virtual machines, which sped it up a bit, and modern virtualization platforms can do this somewhat automatically. Organizations haven't done it automatically completely, right? This is often on their to-do list still, but you have that wait time to get a service. You also have to have people who know how to install these applications, and installing an application for the first time is relatively easy, but making it production proof is quite a different matter. And what you have is, when you have an application like a database that is fundamentally single-threaded, so you have to write everything to the same place and have that as the source of truth, and any reads have to come from that, then you have to architect a way that if this is working and then this is working as a standby and this fails, then you've got to make sure that you've got a way to move your workload to this. There's a lot to understand about that, and that means you need twice the resources, and you need experts who understand that. If you look at MS SQL, there's a lot of information around that to make that work as well. So if you can do all that within Kubernetes with a platform that allows you to ensure that should this go up, if there's a problem with anything that sits below it, apologies, I've normally got a whiteboard, then you can make sure that it's nice and easy for your application developers and the operators of that system to just rely on that. And we can then look at avoiding all that trouble of switching between them and architecting it. And the pipelines that you have that deploy the applications, including the data services potentially, can all be automated. We can run tests to make sure it's working. So we're treating these things as part of the whole, not something that's in an adjacent building that needs to be connected up. And that speeds up your velocity. Thank you.
Right, so you might put it as it's like buying a Lamborghini and then keeping a large trolley with heavy stuff on the back if you don't move all into the Kubernetes platform.
Yes, don't have to drive around with all your tools in a trailer attached to the Lamborghini. I'm sure they're better now. They're owned by Volkswagen Group, but yeah, I imagine they're fairly fragile. Excellent. So the final one here, and I've clicked it up a bit early, is KubeVirt. So KubeVirt is an example of where you would move to a new platform that's largely the same as what you were doing with virtualization. Indeed, it is the same, but it is in a different, there are tiers underneath it. So you put Kubernetes in, maybe put VMware under that. Probably not in this scenario, right? Because you get better performance and you don't have to pay the VMware licensing. But then you can run containers within KubeVirt, which have operating systems. So it's the same sort of thing as VMware. This, of course, you want to make sure that your state is maintained in these, unless you're throwing them away and you're just doing some demo labs or something like that. Perhaps you don't need state then. But we do see this come up. So we've got customers who are doing the Uber DevPods model, where everyone gets their own system to run these things on, and we want to maintain the state because that's essentially their office, that's where they do the work. So we see that as well, but that's the sort of re-platform play. Now I'm going to come back to this later and talk to you about which parts of Portworx play in which areas, but if you see any of these that you think are particularly interesting to what you're trying to do, then we'll return to them. But I want to talk to you first about one of my customers' anecdotes and how they thought moving to Kubernetes was going to go, this containerization journey, versus what the actual experience was. So we as software people, we as technology people, we have to be optimists, right? Because if we're not, we're just not going to get started, because computers are hard. And that's something I say daily, right? But this investment and retail bank, they saw what they were going to do, and they thought we're going to move from stateless to non-critical to critical stateful apps and critical stateful legacy apps, right? And move their estate where it makes sense into Kubernetes. But what they actually experienced was a bit different, and they experienced it differently, and we know why. And this report you can get to here talks about this. So we surveyed 500 practitioners in the industry who are in Kubernetes or thinking of going to Kubernetes. Well, in this case, they're in Kubernetes. And we worked with MarketCube, who are a research organization. And we asked which areas of the stack in Kubernetes need to be matured, right? Which 3 things do you think need to be matured? And application development frameworks came up as top one. That's the thing that they want to make easier. So to get from idea to delivery smoothly as we go through this operations platform was very important. But the second most commonly requested one by more than 2/3 of the participants asked was storage and data management. So what do you think that did to our adoption curve? Well, they stalled when they got to the point where state became important. So stateless went great because database probably outside of Kubernetes, and the stateless bit, scales up and down. It's very nice, and that's what the initial version of Kubernetes was really aimed at. But we're moving forward with that, right? And they found that when they wanted to do stateful apps that were non-critical, it was harder, because we had to make sure that it kept working, even though those internal users or the external users, it wasn't critical, so we could stomach a bit of downtime. And the reason we didn't get through to critical stateful applications and critical stateful legacy applications, things you don't necessarily understand, was because of these non-functional requirements and functional requirements. So we all know that computing and software is a team sport, right? And the teams working to migrate the containers hopefully has done a really good job. And they've deconstructed the applications and they've broken them into APIs. Maybe they've got CI/CD set up, right? Hopefully they've got a good testing strategy. So the developer work has been done. But what we've got a challenge with is, over the past 70 years, we've learned a lot about what systems need to be reliable and performant. And some of those are things like, can they withstand a failure of any given component, because things fail all the time. So we need to make sure we're meeting those non-functional requirements of backup and restore and all these things that systems require to meet that need of the application, so that you don't get blocked by internal yet valid processes to say, we can't put that out, it's not strong enough. So this is where Portworx helped. So we've got the tools to take you through, and I'll take you through them in a minute, for meeting these functional and non-functional requirements. And I'll share with you some benchmarking and some discrete tools that solve for these things. But once we help this bank, this is more like what they experience, right? So it's not perfectly linear, these things never are. But we got them along to the point where they could run legacy apps in Kubernetes. Now, I don't expect everyone to take my word for it, because I do work for Portworx, and as much as I like to be data backed, I'd like you to to seek out your own validation of this. But here's a good place to start with that. So GigaOM, they do analysis of these tools, and you can read the report there if you grab that bit.ly QR code. We will have a link to this at the end as well. But you can see now for 3 years running, we've been put at the front of this pack for how to do enterprise Kubernetes storage. So let's talk about the first strategy as we're moving into bringing state into Kubernetes. So I talk to organizations who are running state in Kubernetes or are looking at it. And the first question is, like, how do you do backups? Are you able to easily get from a backup to a restored state without much work? And they normally look at me and say, what are you doing for a holiday soon, Anne? Because it's not been solved, right? They're trying to change the subject. Or they might say, we're not doing state in Kubernetes. If they say we're not doing state in Kubernetes, I point them to the Data on Kubernetes report and share with them, you know, you're missing out here. This could improve your business. Maybe take a look at that. But if they haven't got an answer to the backup question, and using traditional backup tools like those which come with from the vendors who you're all familiar with, those don't necessarily work with Kubernetes native objects. They will often take the underlying storage, and then should there be a problem, you have to restore those things and reconnect up the pieces. And that might be possible, but it's not fast and it's not fun. So you want to make sure whatever backup tool you're using for Kubernetes is able to restore efficiently and with little work on your part. So it's relaxing and easy to test. So this is the product we have for this, Portworx Backup. Now I'm going to jump to the last point here, that we have a 1 terabyte free forever SaaS service. So you have to pay for your own storage there. It's an object store. Shortly, it will be an NFS if you want it to be as well. But this gives you an application-centric backup of your system. And it's done at the namespace level, and you can work out which ones go into this backup. Maybe there's pieces you don't want backed up. You just label the namespace that you want, and then that will be automatically added to the backup process. And this gives your users that sense of safety that they had when they were backing up their VMs every day, and if they needed to get back to an old point, they could. You can also protect against ransomware with this. So if you're using object locking on something like AWS, or you've got a flash array from Portworx, will do it as well, then there is compliance-led object locking there, so that should someone come in and delete everything, you'd still be able to keep your application backups which contain the data to get you back on track. So it turns a bad day into a better day, right? Or a worse day. You're avoiding that worst case scenario. It also integrates with RBAC. It integrates with RBAC, and you can send it over to compliance system. You can send it to different destinations as well. There's a lot in there. It's a very quick demo, I think 7 minutes if you look at the one on the left, and that free trial is there. So that's the first place I suggest people start if they've not got they're running state in Kubernetes and they want to make sure that it's there when they need it. The next thing organizations need is to know that the system is going to work, and it's going to work from a performance perspective, and it's going to meet those non-functional needs. Now, in the next session, we're going to get into some of the advanced pieces of how to do stay in Kubernetes. So there's some of these icons in this slide that I'm going to skip over. I'll just mention what they do, but we'll save that for next time. But here we have Portworx Enterprise, and Portworx is a consistent storage layer that is software defined that goes underneath the containers that require state. So this means that when you write to one of those disks, it remains there, and it remains there spread across your failure domains. And this means that you can run single source of truth applications, ACID database, for example, in a way that requires that to be consistent and performant. And should that whole node that the system's running on, or even a whole data center go down, you can get that data back up very, very quickly without any operator intervention at all. In the same way you would expect a compute failure to be automatically solved in Kubernetes, we do that also with the storage layer. And we can see a demo of that today. I don't think we're going to have time to go into this demo today, but it's there. That takes you through about 4 minutes of demo there, where you'll see an application go down and be reissued on another node. We've got a few other bits here that are worth touching on. Migrate lets you move between one site and another, so you can migrate to where the grass is greener, whether that's for your own, to move your own data center there, to your own data center, or whether you want to save money by going to where the clouds are cheapest. Maybe there's spot pricing that's better in another place, for example. We also have a secure module, which will allow you to do encryption at either the cluster level. So all the storage we provide is encrypted. We integrate with other things like HashiCorp Vault for that as well. Or you can do on the volume level, you can encrypt as well, which will allow you to multi-tenant your environment in a more secure way. We also do DR. I mentioned last time we can do zero data loss. We can also do low data loss between any two sites, so within about 150 millisecond around the world, which gives you that certainty that you can keep going in the face of an entire data center outage, whether that's in public cloud and a region, or whether that's your own data center. And then autopilot removes the work of your operations team, such as getting tickets saying I need to expand things, moving the pieces around underneath the storage as well. So that takes care of that. And all this is to provide data services, right? Or applications that require state. Now, this is a view of how all these things play from a job level, right? Where are you in your organization? And just to say at the bottom there, we can go from we can work with any Kubernetes distribution, whether that's vanilla, you're running it yourself, or whether you're using one of those high-level services, higher level like OpenShift on-premise or in cloud, or GKE, EKS, AKS, all the Ks in public cloud. We can work with any, and we can potentially stretch between them and connect them up together. We also have, for the SREs and the DevOps people, we help them provide data platforms, which I'll talk about in a moment. We've got those data management pieces, and we can provide protection to those. And the application developers, they just want to get data services. They want it to be easy, and ideally, they know about Geoffrey Moore, right? Probably by spirit. Let's let the system do things for me that I don't want to do. So do they want to create tickets and get databases, or do they just want to hit an API and get a database very quickly? Let's skip that next slide because I don't quite have time for that today, but you can go off and get them. Before we move on to database as a service, I do want to share with you a product we're often compared with, which is CEPH. CEPH's an open source product by, it was Red Hat. It's now gone into IBM's data services division. It allows you to do various things from object to file, and I think that, and block also, which we're talking about here. And we are compared often to it, and here's the lab we set up to do it. Now, it's fairly fragile, and I've got another partner I work with who explaining how fragile CEPH is and how it takes a lot of engineering work and know-how to get this to work. That is not the case with our software. You install our software, we have support if you get stuck, it's quite easy to use. But here's some of those benchmarks that we've got, right? So in each of these metrics, we are outperforming CEPH, but I'm gonna give you the whole set here and just call your attention to a couple of them. So at worst, we are 0.5% better on read IOPS for sequential writes. So you've opened a channel and you write into disk. We get out the way of that. Is it a meaningful change? No, it's not especially meaningful, that 0.5% nearly, but we're never worse, and that's an important piece. But look instead at the faster writes, the faster reads there, the top emboldened one, 84%, that's pretty powerful. 89% better read IOPS. And if we get down to what's actually happening at the database level, where the rubber hits the road, with 286% better performance. Now, I don't know if that's going to allow you to get rid of almost 2/3 of your databases. I imagine they're not constrained by the storage that much as maybe CPU, but maybe you'll get to half. and maybe you'll get down to a third, but that's still very meaningful. So the last piece that we're going to talk about here is those data services. So your developers are just after these pieces, right? And they want to deploy them neatly with the rest of the application. And we provide this database as a service into your clusters wherever they are, whether on AKS, EKS, GKE, OpenShift, anywhere, right? And you can do it the same way for each. So instead of having to shell out to, say, RDS to get a database service and attach that, you can instead do that into your cluster, whether it's in AWS, whether it's in on-premises, and the data services follow the same sort of model. Right? And last time I checked, we were just as current as AWS on the likes of Postgres, for example, for the modernness of those data services. It's a real focus for our company. We believe this is the future. We were at 6 data services this time last year. We should be at 12 by next month. We're at 11 now. And some of those are really important. MongoDB was only really available as Atlas or run it your own, which meant it was in their cluster. Now it can be in yours as a fully managed service. So we are the throat to choke there. If you have a challenge, we're there to help you. And because we're responsible for these data services, we make sure that they're deployed in a way that's going to work. So we'll do the HA deployments of these. You can hit these with an API and get a data service up, which is what developers want to be able to do. We have application backups, of course, and we have that 24/7 support. So there's a little demo there if you want to run that yourself in your own time. That's 2 minutes long. I'll just show you what it can do. Create a database, update a database, expand the capacity of a database all through that user interface. That's currently a SaaS. By the end of the year, that will also be available as on-premises. So we looked at this model before, right? And we've got these levels. So Portworx Enterprise for this foundational modernization. As we look into Portworx data services for when you want to outsource what your systems are doing, we can help you there. And then if you're looking at KubeVirt and things like that, we can help you there, again, with Portworx Backup and Portworx Enterprise. So here are those demos, which I alluded to. You can go and grab those in your own time. If you want to try Portworx, central.portworx.com, and the GigaOms report is there. Now we take any questions. I think we're good for time. Apologies if it's gone on a bit. Let's see if there's any questions. Is Portworx Enterprise able to expose storage class that replicate the underlying storage features like replication, snapshots, performance class, fourth copy DR? Okay, I'm going to hit those in various stages. So I'm not sure what the word expose means, so I should probably Google that. But I think, and I like words, I think it means to provide. So we replicate the underlying storage. Well, you can replicate it once, but that's not replication. We would usually say 2, so you put 1 in each failure domain, or 3 times if you're using 3 failure domains, or if you're hyper-converging these things. Now, we automatically fingerprint any storage that we provide, which allows us to tier it and then let you consume it in that tiering. And that gives you those performance classes. We can create snapshots of the storage, which means we will draw a line under what's happened before and then mark everything that happens afterwards with because we own the data path. And that allows you to very quickly restore to that previous snapshot. Now, it will cause a bit of duplication because you're keeping what was there before, so it wouldn't be overwritten. But this allows you to get very fast failback on things like database schema changes, for example, those sort of things. And this really can be tied into your application deployment pipelines to say, hey, before we do this, create a snapshot so that I can get back there if I need to roll back, if you're not following the fail forward mantra. And DR, yes, we can do DR in 2 ways. We do it either, well, 3 potentially. We can stretch a cluster if that counts as DR. It doesn't count for me, but some people will talk about it in those terms. We can make it so when the first cluster goes, should have a problem, that it fails over to a second cluster, and that's either done through a synchronous process. So this is 0 data loss. We can do that within 10 milliseconds of each data center, which is the same constraint Kubernetes has. Or we can do it asynchronously, which we can do anywhere in the world with a sub 24 seconds data loss with an async DR from next month. We can do async today, but it's up to a minute data loss. I think that answers your question. Those are quite advanced topics, and if you ask that question, you will like the next session where I will take you through how this stuff works, and we'll talk about the advanced state stuff going forward, which gives us a nice segue into what we're doing next. So our next session is advanced state in Kubernetes, or K8s because it rhymes, where we can talk about DR strategies, stretching clusters versus DR, multi-cloud integrations and emerging approaches that we see. We have heat vests for those who attend all 3 sessions. As a prize draw, we've got 3 to give away. And you can catch up on session 1 if you missed anything here on this link, and we'll send that out in the follow-up email as well. I think that's all the questions. That's probably all the time you want me to talk for. Marcus, is there anything else?
No, I think that's pretty much sums it up. And of course, we're open to reach out to if you have any additional questions, regardless of it's being a technical question or if you want to engage with us and see what we can do together moving forward.
Excellent. Well, I hope to see you all on the 3rd one. Do connect on LinkedIn if interested. And I thank you all for your attention and questions. Have a great day and a great rest of the week. Take care.
Thank you. Goodbye.